Hey, check, check. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, welcome back. Last week I outlined the course, and today's going to be our first lesson. However, we won't be starting grammar today. For today, I wanted to outline some of the backstory of English because I'm going to keep coming back to this again and again all throughout the course. Today's more of a history lesson than a grammar lesson. But before beginning, did anyone have any questions about what we did last week?
You said this course uses a modified Reed-Kellogg system. But in modern linguistics, phrase structure trees are way more common. So why use Reed-Kellogg at all?
Oh, you've been reading ahead again. It is a good question. Phrase structure trees are powerful, but they're not beginner friendly. Those things are meant for real hardcore grammar analysis, the kind of analysis you need when you're training large language models. But we're not language scientists. We just need a basic understanding of grammar for our own personal use. When we're writing, when we're taking a test, we need something that we can pull out and use right there on the spot. So the grid system I show you is not as powerful, but it's much more beginner friendly. Any other questions?
Teacher, last time I tried to study grammar, there were a ton of exceptions I had to memorize. So what happens when we get to the exceptions to the rules? Do we switch back to the classic grammar? Or is there a second kind of grid grammar just for exceptions?
No, I'm not going to show you two grid grammars. There's only going to be one. There's not going to be a need for a second system. First of all, remember these aren't rules in the traditional sense. They're just one system amongst many. It's a visual system that shows how English actually behaves. Classical grammar starts with the wrong rules. When the rules don't match what the speakers do, the mismatch gets labeled an exception. But the problem isn't the language, the problem is the rule. We're going to start with a rule that does match how people use English. And then when the rules match behavior, there's no contradiction. When there's no contradiction, there's no exceptions. It is just the rule. Anything else?
I have a structural question. If English is supposed to be a communication system, why is it so messy? Why does it have conflicting rules and overlapping patterns? It would have been more efficient for the designers of English to make everything consistent.
Well, that's exactly the issue, Robert. English wasn't designed. No one sat down and built it the way that you built a machine. It grew layer by layer as different groups collided, mixed, and borrowed from each other. The grammar is a mess because the history of English is a mess. It was many different systems for many different people over many different centuries. Not all parts had the same goal. That is a good question because it leads us straight into today's lesson, the creation of English, that moment the layers start to stack. It begins in the year 1066. Let me switch over to here. Okay, in my reality, we all live on this planet. We call it Earth. Let me show you different parts of it. Now, the place here, this place we call England, and it's where English comes from. So let me zoom in some. Zoom in. Okay. Now, a little bit about the history of England. 1,000 years ago, there were two nations next to England. Saxony, which was here. That is Saxony. And Norman, which was here. Normandy. Okay. Now, for many years, Saxon would send military units over to English and they established outposts and communities. So Saxon had already moved into England. Then the big important event in 1066 was the Norman invasion. Normandy sent their military units up, and they fought the Saxon military units. I moved up to here. Now, the Normandy military units eventually won, and they became the new leaders of the area.
I have a historical systems question. Why did the Normans invade England at all? What conditions made the invasion strategically worthwhile for them?
Let's not go too far into that topic. I mean, this is an English class, not a history class. But the short version is that the king of Saxony died without ever setting up the next king. Nobody was actually for sure who the next king truly was. Many different groups all claimed they were the real next king, including the Duke of Normandy. What's important is that after 1066, there were these two groups living together in England. It's not important why the two groups wanted to live there. Okay, we have Norman and Saxon. Let me tell you a bit about the people living in England at that time and what each of their cultures was like. Now, Normandy, they spoke Norman. Saxony, they spoke Saxon. Normans, they were the kings, the nobles, the police. Saxony, they were the farmers, the workers, and the servants. Normandy lived in big castles. Saxony, they weren't as rich. They didn't have the money. Their living conditions were much easier. Okay. Normandy, they were the rulers and the kings, so they controlled all the courts. Saxony, they didn't have as much power, but they did have power in one important area. They controlled the markets. So whenever you had to trade or buy things, when you negotiated with the clerk, you were using the Saxon language. Normans, they were writing the court document. All of the written documents here were done by Normandy. Saxons were much poorer. They didn't have as much education. They didn't write, mostly. However, Saxony did do most of the speaking. Whenever there's trade or negotiation going on, you had to speak Saxon. Also, there were much more Saxony people than Normandy people, so the majority of speaking was all done in Saxony. Other things, example words. Because they were two different languages, each language had their own word for something. And when the languages combined, English kept both words. Examples. Inquire is the Normandy word. Saxon word, ask. Another pair, response and answer. This is why English has two words that mean the same idea, one from Normandy, one from Saxon. Chef, cook. Another example, difficult, tough. Forest, woods. Street, road. Double, twin. For each of these, you can kind of see how the Norman word was fancier or more prestigious, and the Saxon words were simpler, used by the common folk. This isn't true for every double that you'll see, but in general, Norman words were fancier and Saxon words were more low class. Other examples. Norman and Saxon had changes for words. We have beef and cow, pork and pig, mutton, sheep, venison, deer, poultry, chicken, pastry, bread. This is the example that you will see again and again in many different teaching systems and textbooks that shows that there is a split between Norman and Saxon.
Teacher? If cows become beef and pigs become pork, then why don't fish become something like Norman language fish? And the same thing for turkey. Turkey is still just turkey. Is this one of those grammar class exceptions to the rule things?
It gets messy. The popular story is that Saxons were the farmers. They spent most of their time looking at the animal. And then the Normans were kings and rulers, so they only ever saw the meat. They didn't go to the farm to look at the animal. But I did some research into this, and that split didn't happen until much later in time, in a time called the Renaissance. That's when more people began using Norman words for food because there was a popular trend at the time of making food fancy or high class. For several hundred years, beef was both fancy and common. Cow was both fancy and common. So this is just a case of English having a long history. In 1066, both words joined English language. And then for 800 years, totally different people, totally different dialect, they decided to split them again. More examples. So we have purchase, buy, large, big, present, gift, rapid, fast, insect, bug, autumn, fall, finish, end. Notice in each of these, the norm words, they're fancier, they're smoother, more flowing, and longer. Saxony words, very short, punchy, direct, they're condensed, and they hit hard.
So if Saxon words are short and Norman words are long, does that mean every long word is Norman and every short word is Saxon? Because that seems like a rule I can actually remember.
It's not so much length as it is tone. Norman is soft and flowing and fancy. Saxon is hard and punchy and physical. A counterexample I've used with other classes is graveyard versus tomb. Graveyard has all the hard sounds in it, like grr, r, d. Saxon has that flowing ooh sound in it. So even though graveyard is a longer word, it is more hard. Tomb is a shorter word, but it has that ooh flowing sound in it. And remember, it's not an absolute rule. It's been 1,000 years since Norman and Saxon combined to make English, and there's been many new words added into English since that time. Long words and short words. And those have nothing to do with either Norman or Saxon. Difference isn't just sound. Grammar rules for the two languages were different too. English kept both systems. Norman would change words by adding a new sound to the end. As example, apple, apples, duck, ducks. You add the sound at the end of the word. Saxony, in contrast, didn't add anything at the end. They changed something in the middle. Man to men, foot to feet. Other examples, Normandy adding sounds to the end of a word. Talk, talked. Help, helped. This way, we're adding, instead of adding an S at the end, we're adding an ED at the end. This is very much a Normandy style pattern. Saxony, same thing. Didn't add a sound at the end, but changed the sound in the middle. We have sing, sang. Run, ran. Nothing new at the end, but the middle changed.
Teacher, the vowel change pattern makes sense, but some verbs don't just have two forms. They have three. Drink, drank, drunk. Why do the vowels shift twice? It looks random.
Well, this just highlights how different the grammar systems actually were. Norman and Saxon did not have the same number of categories. We'll learn more about the number of categories much later in the course. If you can hold off till then, it's going to be much simpler. I need to teach you the grid system first. Then I can just point to the 3 places on the grid. I'm like, sing is here. Sang is here. Sung is this place. If I try to explain it to you now and you don't know the grid system, it's going to take a lot longer to explain. But I do want to show you two ways that the language uses two different grammar systems. Let's talk about how each language uses time. I'll switch to here. Now, remember the Normans, Normandy, they were the kings and rulers. Saxony, they were the farmers and laborers. So when the two languages combine and they're trying to learn each other's languages or teach their own language to the other person, there was this conflict. Norman says there are 3 verbs, past, present, and future. Saxony language did not have these 3. Saxony only has 2. So Saxony says, oh, there are 2 verbs, near and far verbs. Back to the Normans. No, there's not 2 verbs, there's 3 verbs, past, present, and future. Then the Saxonies argued, no, there's 2 verbs. There's the near verb and the far verb. King says, I am the king. There are 3 verbs. Okay. There are 3 verbs. Okay, this is why English future tense feels so strange today. Past verbs and present verbs have a system, and then future verbs have something totally different. When Norman language brought in the idea of a future, Saxon language didn't have any system. Saxon only had past and non-past. So English had to build up this future tense from scratch using whatever they could come up with. That's why when we study English today, the future tense, it seems so weird. It feels improvised or bolted on because it really was invented later and doesn't fit neatly with the older Saxon grammar underneath. And the truth is even more messy than that. Let's go back to the map. So we've been talking about English as a merger of Saxon and Norman together. 2 languages with different sounds, different grammars, different vocabulary. But here's the twist. Neither Saxon nor Norman was pure language to begin with. Saxony was already a blend of many different German dialects. You had many coming in here, Anglos, Saxons, Jutes, they all smashed together. Norman, same thing happened. Norman was already a blend of, let's draw the lines. Norman was already Old French and Norse. The Norsemen who settled in France mixed their language with French before ever even arriving in England. So when Saxon and Norman collided in 1066, it was not 2 languages merging, it was 5. This is just what languages do. The same thing's happening right now. Let me change to the Earth here. And let me show you North America, which is here. Okay, this region on the border of United States and Mexico, it has millions of English speakers and it has millions of Spanish speakers. Now, as communities live side by side, more and more people grow up speaking both. And when 2 full grammar systems live inside the same speaker's mind, they start to blend. That blending creates what we call Spanglish. Spanglish isn't a separate language, at least not yet. It's a mixed system. But if it keeps evolving hundreds of years, it could become a new language. And if that happens, the people in the future might be confused by the grammar rules for the same reason English speakers are confused today. English grammar and Spanish grammar don't match. So if this does become a new language, the new system would take pieces from both. And in that future, textbooks might teach those mismatches as rules and exceptions to the rules, even though they originally came from two different languages merging together. So let's wrap up. Most important, English is two languages. Remember that. All the proof that you need is that there's two words for nearly everything. The speaking patterns are different and the phonemes are different. Also, there's two kinds of grammar rules. English has both of those rules merged together. So before we go, are there any questions?
It is clear that English is inefficient. Why has nobody attempted repair?
Oh, people did try to fix English, lots of them, for hundreds of years. There were spelling reformers, grammar reformers, dictionary writers, school boards, even governments, and they're all trying to clean up the mess. But here's the problem. Trying to fix language from the top down almost never works. You can't tell millions of people, okay, now everyone talk this new way, starting now. People don't change how they speak because some person in an office somewhere tells them to. It's like I told you last week, the best attitude is to be like a scientist. Watch people, study the patterns, describe them. Don't try to command the language. Let the rules come from the people. Don't push rules to the people. That's why I don't want to teach you how English should be. I teach you English how it's actually used by real people. Language grows from the bottom up, not the top down. Anyway, let me try and wrap up today. Main idea I want you to remember is that English is two language systems trying to work together. It's not rules and exceptions to the rules. It's two sets of rules. Next week, we'll do a focus lesson just on the sounds of Saxon and Norman and what each one gives to English. After that, we'll go into another topic, but coming up for next week is the language ones. That is all for today. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Ending transmission.
Stay
Goodbye.
amazing.
Bye.
All right.